Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. We're just going to give it a minute here, and we'll spotlight our panelists here today. I'm really excited to welcome a team from Amgen, and which this panel discussions is going to be focused on the potential for ERGs to drive business and community impact. And we've got Aaron Wheeler, Mike Edmondson, and Racquel. And Racquel, I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name. I'll let you introduce yourself. So I'll turn it over to Aaron to kick us off, and welcome everyone.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Welcome everyone to this event. My name is Aaron Wheeler and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a business performance manager in Amgen's research and development operations division. My day-to-day job is finding creative and innovative ways to get better diversity and representation from underrepresented patient populations in Amgen's clinical trials, which we'll talk about in depth today. We'll also talk about how ERGs are a place to foster connection and a sense of belonging with the employees, but more importantly, how ERGs can drive business and community impact. The two panelists we have today are executives, and they'll share how Amgen's Black Employee Network spearheaded efforts to strengthen diversity in our clinical trials, and in a sense are driving a transformational change in the biotech industry. So just a little level setting, and I think most of the people on the call know this, but ERGs, or employee resource groups, have been an asset that can positively impact business performance. In the 1960s, ERGs began as groups of underrepresented minorities with the goals of addressing racial tension and providing a support network within their organizations. But as society and the workplace have evolved, so has the reach and the role of ERGs. Whether it's in recruiting, onboarding, employee retention, or overall corporate diversity, ERGs are now recognized as a driving force in the business process. It's well documented that people who participate as subjects in clinical trials in the United States tend to be much more homogeneous than the true American population, despite the fact that nearly 40% of America is made up of racial or ethnic minority groups. In fact, the low ratio of racial and ethnic minorities to white participants in clinical trials is very particular in the industry that we work in. Whites account for nearly 65% of the total US population, but in 2020, they made up over 83% of the participant in clinical trials. Through the collaboration of Amgen's ERGs, we set out to find a way to reduce this historically systematic gap in the biotech industry. And what that gap led to, and which we'll discuss today, is the emergence of a program known as RISE, Representation in Clinical Research. And RISE is dedicated to addressing these systematic issues that deter people of color from participating in clinical trials. Today, I have a very distinct honor and pleasure of introducing two true ERG champions. Both of our panelists are genuine and authentic leaders who have been instrumental in helping several people navigate their careers at Amgen, including myself. They're highly respected within the company, and their insights have sharpened the way Amgen executes several business processes. Mike and Racquel have played a big part in my understanding of Amgen's culture and the emphasis and the importance of our ERGs. So just to introduce the panelists, Mike Edmondson has been with the company since 2009. In his current role since 2020, and he's also a former ABN global leader. He did that for almost 2 years. Mike's team includes the Global Field Excellence, the Global LMP, and the Global DIMB. The Global Field Excellence Group partners with regional field capability teams to establish guidance and support as customer engagement and models evolve. The Global LMP Group coordinates with field leaders as a strategic thought partner in the execution of localized training, as well as develops core content to enable the effective field training with local trainers in all three GCO regions. So in a nutshell, Mike runs or works with the people who sells Amgen's products, if you're not familiar with biotech lingo, because it took me a while to understand what all of that meant too. The Global DIMB Group increases awareness and education and strategic focus while driving work streams to enhance staff diversity, recruitment, retention, and align business applications. Racquel Racadio is a director of representation and clinical research and is Amgen's research and development organization with Global Medical. She co-leads Amgen's RISE team, and she serves as a global senior leadership team for the Amgen Black Employee Network. She's also an active member of the Amgen Asian Association, Women Empowered to Be Exceptional, the Amgen Latino Employee Network, and the Pride ERG. Racquel has been with Amgen for 5 years, and she brings her extensive background in the development and execution in clinical trials and the public health research, studying racial, ethnic, and sex-related disparities in the healthcare access and healthcare outcomes. She's currently a PhD candidate at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So with those two illustrious careers and me knowing them personally and all the wonderful things that they do for Amgen, we're going to start with some questions. And my first question for you both is, what compelled you to join an ERG, and what's been the biggest impact on your career during your time at Amgen?
Ladies first, I'll defer to you, Racquel, please.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron, I think I like to just be around people, so I'm always looking for the cool kids. But seriously, there's a few reasons why I joined an ERG and multiple ERGs that you listed there. The first is I've really been involved in public service as far back as that I can remember. It's a family and community tradition, and always done that, as far back as I really can remember as a child. And I bring that up because ERGs at Amgen are really constantly spearheading community service, charitable giving, and other kinds of these activities. So it highlights places where people need our help and show us how we can directly, as employees, together spend our time and expertise and things like that. Secondarily, as a first-generation American woman of color in biotech, there are not many of us. ERGs are really a natural, safe, and welcoming place where we can find coworkers that share the same backgrounds as us and who are willing to share their stories and their support and celebrate with you and amplify the voices of all of the talented people within our organization. And then the last thing I want to say is about being a member of multiple ERGs. It really helps me to be comfortable in the intersectionality of my own identity and to be an ally for my colleagues. Allyship is something that's extremely important to my own experience as an employee and as a mentor and as a coworker. So just to wanting to learn more about others' lived experiences, my activity and my presence in multiple ERGs allows me to do that, but also set an example as a developing leader for my team and others across our organization.
Well, thank you for that, Mike.
So my answer, Aaron, is non-traditional and very different from Racquel's. So prior to coming to Amgen, I was actually very involved in building a significant ERGs. In fact, I actually led a multicultural business team from one of the major companies in the industry for a couple of years. So that was all different ERGs and so forth. My first 9 years at Amgen, I was only involved in the WE2, the women's organization, as a coach and a mentor, but I was not involved in anything else purposely. So in my 9th year with the company, I was approached by, at the time, our chief compliance officer, a CEO staff member who asked me to consider leading the Amgen Black Employee Network. We call it ABEN. My response was a very quick no. And she looked at me, it's like, well, why not? And I kind of share with her that basically, I think that in order for ERGs to have real business impact and have traction, you have to have the CEO staff support. And based on the years I've been with the company, I hadn't really seen it for the Amgen Black Employee Network, and I wasn't really involved in it. So her response was within 24 hours, had me sitting in front of our CEO. And it was supposed to be a 15-minute talk, which turned into about an hour and 15-minute talk. He kind of shared his heart for me as far as what his vision was. And based on that, how could you say no? And for me personally, it presented a great opportunity to, first of all, see how serious our top leaders in the company were about ERGs. And secondly, it gave me a chance to kind of replicate some things that I knew as far as building ERGs. And I would say the 3 areas that I focused on that I knew that would be important to get that credibility were: one, to get top talent. I know that when you have top talent identified by people who are already very good at their jobs, but bringing their credibility to the ERG was important. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that we actually had the growth. We thought that was going to be real important because the bigger the ERG, the more credibility you give throughout the organization, and of course, the senior staff. And third, we wanted to find really a pain point in a business here that we felt that we could actually help to solve. And relevant to this conversation, that was actually clinical diversity and diversity in clinical trials, which we knew was even beyond Amgen, was an important thing within the industry. We felt that was a great opportunity based on a lot of previous work that had been done. So that kind of got me into the game, and I've been a very passionate partner since then.
No, both fantastic answers, and I'm a little biased, obviously, because I work with you, work for Amgen, and I know what a great job you do for the company. But here's a question I'll ask you: is RISE also has two unique components to its creation that goes beyond scientific rationale or the need for improved diversity in our study programs. First, RISE is a beautiful example of the power of an ERG and how it can achieve a business impact and contributes to a company's mission overall. The second part of the story is an illustration of the opportunity to harness career development and talent growth. And Mike, you briefly touched on this. During your time as an ERG global lead, what were some of the key focus points of ABIN?
Yeah, and again, I touched on it previously, or just to kind of double down on a few points I made earlier. Okay, so I think one area we wanted to focus on, again, were the people and talent. And we recognize there are a lot of people who've done some great work, especially in the area going to the whole clinical trial diversity thing, as far as that goes. People like Racquel, who you see before us, okay, had done some tremendous work, having developed a white paper, as well as her executive director, Jude Yang. And of course, with really our vice president, Panelists Desego, who had some tremendous credibility in that work. We knew that we had our hands on something, but we had to get it focused. We had to get it supported. So myself and Ponda, we basically saw the opportunity to really start to socialize the really 3 to 5 years of previous work that had been done with our senior leadership. And Ponda and I had a chance to actually present this to our entire R&D team at a town hall meeting. And the leaders, to their credit, Dave Reese and Duro Sleep, were so impressed. And by the way, they're our chief medical officer as well as our head of R&D, Dave Reese here. So they're our top 2 medical leaders within the company. They saw the work, they were impressed by it, and they gave us an interesting challenge. They said, you know what, that's pretty good. We see the vision that you have, but we feel that we can do it faster. So actually, Dave pushed us to turn that 5-year proposal into a 3-year presentation, and to present that in front of his senior leadership team. So it was pretty exciting to actually have, again, recognizing that the work that we knew was important to be bought into by the senior leaders, but a chance to actually partner with those guys made it just a tremendous opportunity. And the good news was that we had done a lot of groundwork with it, and we also had some of the top leaders in our own company, like Racquel and Jude, who were doing the work. So it presented us an opportunity to really take some things forward. So yeah, for me that was key.
No, that's good. Racquel, the uniqueness of how an ERG can drive business process kind of led to RISE, as Mike mentioned. Can you elaborate on RISE and why it's such an important program from a business and community standpoint?
Yeah, Aaron, I think you alluded to this at the beginning to give the audience, a real level set on, the issue itself. And to double down on that, talking about clinical trials that have lacked patient diversity and representation for decades, this is really an issue that's been recognized long before the pandemic, long before there was social unrest over the past years, that really brought this issue to the forefront of public discussion. So I think a lot of people on the call are familiar a bit more now with clinical trials, but the issue's been going on for quite a while. So we see this as a problem because there are recognized differences in the incidence of disease among racial and ethnic groups, but there's also differences in exposure and their response to medicines that are developed for them. And as you said earlier, participant populations in clinical trials really remain predominantly white. Now, this is a problem because this underrepresentation leads to the collection of what we think is incomplete or limited trial data that affects really the generalizability of efficacy and safety results, really leads to the limited access to innovative treatments for a lot of communities, and contributes to real disparities in healthcare and health outcomes. Now, the clinical trial space is also becoming increasingly competitive, and patients and their physicians are becoming more and more empowered to make choices for themselves based on a lot of factors, including whether a medicine was developed with them and their families and communities in mind. So this is really an important business issue to ensure that we continue to be recognized as a company that patients and their providers and their communities should trust to work with. But the most important thing, because underrepresentation can affect the generalizability that I mentioned before, this work is also a scientific imperative for everyone conducting clinical research. And then the last thing I want to say about that is that the lack of diversity and proportional representation in research really has that potential to limit access to treatment, contribute to those disparities I mentioned, especially those that have been historically excluded from research for a long time. And so we see that that improvement here is not just important, but it's critical to advancing social justice and health equity. And that's why RISE came to be. And Mike mentioned this, you mentioned this as well, that we really started accelerating those efforts that really were done, outside of our day jobs in 2020 with the formation of RISE. And we're that team that's really dedicated fully to addressing this issue. A lot of us come from clinical trial design, operations, health disparities research. We're focused really solely on this work. Amgen's objectives for our program, and a lot of people have heard about it already, but hopefully this is new for some people on the call, is that we're really trying to exceed that sort of industry standard for proportional representation, really exceed what's been done so far. Building infrastructure that sustainably supports the work, because if you don't have a sustainable solution, then you're not really giving an impact on anything. And then most importantly, collaborating with partners across the Amgen organization so that we can pursue our broader health equity strategies and adapt them to where we've seen success to make sure that we can expand them not only in the US, but also globally outside of the United States.
No, thank you for that. And Mike, you've mentioned this, but I'd like to dive just a little bit deeper on it. So how was Amgen's drive to push the RISE initiative, or how did that aid in talent development? Like what was that process when RISE started to be formed that you looked at to start to look for talented people to build that team?
Yeah. So, Aaron, I'm glad you actually pushed on that, because I had a couple more comments to say on that topic. So I think talent is super important, and our philosophy was this here, and I say our. At the time, I was building Aben out in partnership with Tamika Jean-Baptiste, who's currently now our Chief Diversity Officer. And back then, we were the co-leads of our Aben global team. And so in regards to talent development, we kind of agreed that in order for us to have success with and credibility with our CEO staff, that we had to make sure that we had to find people that are willing to go above and beyond. And something that Racquel just mentioned a second ago, I think was key to that, were people who are good at what they do, all right, but willing to do more. All right, and so that was kind of the premise of what we actually look for. People who are already top performers at their jobs, but they're willing to raise their hand and do additional work, because it's interesting. I kind of make it analogous to any volunteer organization that are out there. And when it comes time for work to get done, everyone's excited and raise their hands. But when work starts, about 90% of people kind of disappear. And so you have that 10% remaining. This is no different, okay? And so people like Racquel were one of those 10%ers. And so we felt that first of all, we had people who were serious about actually moving the ball forward in a meaningful way. Again, in spare time. A lot of this work was actually done on weekends and in the evenings here. So finding that type of talent, the other benefit too was it would also help to engage our leaders. When they see that people who are already considered to be top performers getting involved in that kind of work, it definitely piqued the interest. So now when you combine that type of talent, and really gave them some meaningful work. Okay, we can call it a side or collateral duty, and all of a sudden get a very specific business plan together and start to move it forward. It makes a real difference here. It starts to get the attention of our senior staff. So that was kind of our approach to it. And I use Racquel as one example with some of her expertise in clinical trial and early trial development. But I can share with you without saying names, but another person, for example. Okay, we felt that communications was very important. So I had to find somebody that was very good as far as writing business plans. So I found a young lady who today is actually doing a very important role in the company. But back then, she was a director on our marketing team, and I challenged her with writing a business plan. I asked her if she had written a business plan. Her response was, "Well, it's interesting you asked that question, Mike, because I actually won $50,000 in business plan writing contest." And I'm like, really? Okay, so from now on, you are now our official writer. So we agreed that anything that comes through our team that goes to CEO staff had to go through her, because we want to make sure they had a very strategic approach, okay, with very specific goals and also metrics that goes along the way. When you have the strategy combined with the goals and with the appropriate metrics here, it tends to get the attention. And so focusing again on those 3 areas I mentioned before, as far as the business goes, again, talent as far as identifying talent, focusing on a meaningful business opportunity like clinical trial diversity, and again on the overall growth here. We kind of was able to demonstrate where we were and actually where we wanted to go in front of CEO staff, which really got the attention. So I think talent, in my opinion, is everything. Really the basis of what we've been able to do is based on the fact that we found people who are willing to go above and beyond, Aaron. So hopefully that answers your question a little more effectively.
No, great job, Mike. Racquel, I asked this question to you. In addition to clinical trials, what are some other aspects has RISE impacted from a business or community perspective?
Yeah, so RISE has really what we call 6 strategic pillars that encompass clinical trials, of course. That's really our main focus, but we also focus on 5 other areas that we believe have to be addressed simultaneously in order to achieve genuine success, right? You can talk about clinical trials and work in that space, but if you don't support it from all the other pieces that affect it, we don't feel that you can really have that genuine impact. So we're really looking at data analytics, external collaboration with experts and community organizations, driving organizational cultural change because change begins at home, regulatory and policy activities, because that kind of environment also affects how science and research is done, and then exploring diversity and representation in translational science, because we want to start as early as possible in the clinical research and research space. So there's a lot of activities that really underpin this work, but I want to highlight some really critical ones for the audience here. The first one is really supporting inclusive and community-based participatory research throughout the clinical trial lifecycle, beginning as early as possible. A lot of those words that I use right there are not typical to the historical way we've done clinical trials, but supporting inclusive principles, making sure the community is involved, and then making sure they're involved as early and throughout as early as possible is something that we're really focusing on. But we really want to ally with internal and external experts to really exchange knowledge and have those best practices in what we're doing. Those external experts I mentioned are really important because they are the patients, they are the caregivers, they are their broader communities and the healthcare provider community, especially racial and ethnic minority providers. We already have relationships with the National Medical Association and the National Hispanic Medical Association, among others, to work on this very issue, as well as legislators, including those that belong to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and so on, because those parts are really important to make sure that we are being current and working with the right partners. So we're really laser focused on joining forces with patients and their communities as partners and leaders to not only increase that awareness of clinical trials and their benefits, but to really co-create health and research solutions that truly benefit those communities. So we've conducted multiple community advisory boards focused on BIPOC insights that we're continuing now, really engaging with clinical sites that have those existing relationships with participants from racial and ethnic minority communities, and then developing partnerships and sponsorships and collaborations with several organizations across the environment, including the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, the CEO Roundtable's Going for Gold initiative. It's a partnership with HBCUs and HSIs, the creation of Amgen's HBCU Biotech Fellowship Program, as well as sponsorships of several health events and things that are led by organizations that really have relationships with the community, including Black Health Matters, BlackDoctor.org, and Africa Bio. So there's so many more examples I wanted to share with you, but those are just a few because I really wanted to highlight for you the RISE teams and the program's focus on community engagement.
No, thank you for sharing that. Mike, I know you mentioned your initial conversation with the CEO, but over the course of time with RISE, how difficult or not difficult has it been to get CEO sponsorship in an overall RISE concept from your perspective?
Yeah, so Aaron, I think the important word I'll use is sponsorship. And that's not just for DI&B initiatives here, but really for any real business initiatives to move forward. Yeah, you have to have that senior staff sponsorship. So in our case here, as I shared with you earlier, that Ponda, who's actually the head of the overall RISE program, and myself had a chance to present to Daryl Sleep and to Dave Reese. Dave Reese is our head of R&D research for the company, and obviously, very important person within the company as far as the CEO staff goes. So once we actually was able to show him a very specific approach, okay, we knew the pain point existed, and that was great. But actually, he challenged us to actually kind of fine tune our approach, gave us some advice in regards to things that would resonate with the CEO staff. Once we had that and his sponsorship, to be very blunt, it became much easier. Obviously, we had to earn the right to do that. And again, I make it sound simplistic, but the point of that happening, if you take it back 5 years, that included a whole lot of groundwork. Okay, worked with people like Racquel and Jude and many others did as far as awareness building. Okay, just really years of it. But once they actually put into a framework and we got that sponsorship with a very specific approach, then it became easy. So that there was a couple of easy conversations, but keep in mind, 5 years contributed to that point in time. So perfect example of where opportunity met the moment to allow us to have success with that.
Racquel, this may be a question you've been asked multiple times before, but I'm just curious, what kind of sparked your interest in medical research and clinical trials?
That's a really good question, Erin. I have what my parents would call messy, but what I like to call a nonlinear route to clinical research, because it's not actually a field that high schoolers or undergraduates or even many graduate students are exposed to. So I really came to clinical research after a couple of other what I like to call lifetimes in my professional career. I've always had a natural interest in life science, but also in the arts. So I actually started in journalism and advertising before getting a second degree in biology, which is where I really first discovered public health and research and began my first formal research in academia, doing hospital-based research and studying disparities in health outcomes and access. It wasn't until I left medical school that I got closer to the clinical research world, because I was directing a branch of a company that develops the commercial names for soon-to-be approved medicines. And I was recruited by one of my clients, which actually was a startup biotech company, to become a CRA, which is a role that's responsible for managing clinical sites during clinical trials. And that was it. I got to work in that amazing space that is between where research starts in a lab and where new medicines and devices are approved for patients. And that started what's now a decade in clinical research that's really spanned the country and the globe and enrolls in several different places. And now in my dream job, which is really focused on diversity and representation in clinical trials. So it was circuitous, but here I am and so excited that people are interested in hearing me talk about it. So hopefully that gave you an insight into what that looked like.
No, it really did. And what I would also like to highlight Amgen's current ESG, environmental, social, and governance strategic framework that has 4 pillars, which are healthy people, healthy society, healthy planet, and a healthy Amgen. And the strong ERGs and RISE falls into at least 3 of those categories. We focus on removing barriers that limit equitable access to healthcare so that people can live their healthiest lives, supporting the pillar of healthy people. We work towards a more just society for our employees and the people we serve, which is the foundation of our healthy society pillar. And lastly, through our ERGs and programs like RISE, we're creating a healthy Amgen. We hold ourselves to a high standard in our operations, working to ensure our culture and products reflect Amgen values. Since this is an ERG summit, one of the questions I would like to ask either one of you is there are several benefits to having thriving ERGs in the organization. What benefits have you seen in Amgen because of its emphasis on ERGs?
I'll hop in there, Mike. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit on the call, obviously. That's idea of innovation really coming from the ERGs themselves. There are some issues and challenges that I'm not sure, at the top levels, people might have been naturally aware of. And people come up with innovational ideas, things that are new within that group, especially when they're in a place to feel safe about it, that they're able to share those ideas, and also have people within that organization that can take those to the next level. And Mike's a perfect example of that. I've really had natural sponsorship and mentorship relationships built out of that, including Mike himself, which not only helps the work that I'm doing now, but also in my own personal career. So there are so many benefits to that, but I really wanted to highlight a couple of those.
Yeah, Aaron, I often say that when I present with Racquel, my goal is to talk as little as possible and I look better. So I'll just let her do her thing, okay? And I thought she did a great job as far as answering that question. One thing I'll add to that, though, is that so my role is a global role. So not only within the U.S., but also ex-U.S. And we talk about the term as far as diversity, and of course, with the focus on inclusion and belonging, is interesting. I find this kind of traveling around where you say diversity and inclusion. It may be one thing here in the U.S., but when you go to Japan or you go to Australia or other places around the world, it can mean very different things. What I have seen, though, is that it's really given a very strong platform for voices to be heard. So we've been able to learn a lot, okay, from the ERGs in regards to particular groups in particular parts of the country, as far as what some of the needs are, and how we can be better as a company, and ultimately in our mission as far as serving patients. So I think having those different perspectives is important, and really from a global perspective, with the ERGs having more of a global voice, we're really hearing a lot that we've been able to act on and build on as a company. So.
Cool. So how long is Amgen committing to Rise in order to see tangible results? Because from doing it day to day, I understand how this process is and so many things that's involved in it. But how long is Amgen expecting, before they kind of see a return on investment?
Let me give a top level answer, then I'll let Racquel give the real answer. Okay, again, to kind of take you back again. When we first presented the idea, we said, you know what? Okay, we presented to Dave Reese and senior medical team, his leadership team, a 5-year plan. And we thought that was pretty good and pretty aggressive. And I love Dave's response where he shook his head and says, no, not good enough. Okay. And so you have a top CEO staff member who pushed us and said, how about coming back to me with a 3-year plan? Let's talk about that. All right. So basically, we put together, a very aggressive 3-year plan with some very specific benchmarks. But quite frankly, I think each benchmark has some measures of success as far as that foundation goes. A lot of the work is building the foundation. Okay. And once that foundation is built, then things can really start to move here, especially earlier in the clinical trial process. All right. And at this point, that's when I'll turn it over to you, Racquel, to give the real answer. And there you go.
No, actually, Erin, I really like this question because it's actually 2 parts, right? One was how long is Amgen committed to it? And then one is, when do we expect to see results? Because those are 2 separate questions. I'm glad Mike answered the second one, which is really in the next 3 years we expect to see positive results. But RISE is really part of Amgen's broader commitment that you mentioned to health equity, which takes time to ensure impact. So Amgen is definitely committed to RISE for the foreseeable future, not only for clinical trials in the next 3 years, but as we see RISE is doing now as a separate team, becoming just how business is done. So that means inclusive research just becomes the DNA of what we do as a company. So definitely 3 years, but as far as what we do, we see that happening honestly forever because it becomes just what we do.
Oh, that's good. And from sitting in some breakout groups and listening to a couple presenters, one of the questions that came up I thought was really interesting was about collaborating between ERGs, right? And Racquel, you're a member of several ERGs, and Mike, I know you're a member of multiple ERGs as well. So being a member of multiple ERGs, can you tell us if they routinely collaborate with each other, or are there opportunities to improve those efforts?
Well,
I think
Racquel,
I mentioned earlier, that being part of several of them, I have seen that collaboration, especially in my experience with our Women Empowered to Be Exceptional, and as well as some of our groups that are focused on racial and ethnic communities. So we partner very routinely, actually more than I even expected. Most of our events are double sponsored or triple sponsored by organizations. So it shows a real amount of allyship, as well as, mutual support for the things that they're doing. I will say, of course, there's opportunities to improve, and that starts with individual employees and with ERG leaders becoming members of other ERGs. Obviously, that's something very important to me because I think that we can truly learn from one another when we do that. And be vulnerable in spaces that may not necessarily be centered on you or your background in order to amplify each other's voices. But that cross collaboration is critical, I think, to not only amplifying each other's voices, but making sure that we're setting that kind of example that we support one another within the organization.
Yeah, great answer, Racquel. And as you mentioned, Erin, I am a part of a number of ERGs, particularly the Veterans Organization, okay, as well as the Women's We Too organization and ABEN. And I'm also very active in other ones that I'm not a part of here, being head of DIB for our commercial team. So I'm very involved with them. So I think that we've been on the journey. I think a few years back, you could say it was very little collaboration. It was almost like an event when you did anything together. Okay, we're now to the point that Racquel just described, whereas now it's more the norm, okay, in regards to working together within the ERGs, probably because, to her point, as far as multiple membership. However, okay, again, as Racquel said, I think that there's a great opportunity for us to do more. Okay, ultimately, there's lots of learnings that we can learn from each other. All right, and we talk about the ultimate goal as far as embedding DIB as a business practice. Okay, it should be how we do things in general. So with that being said, okay, I think there's more opportunities for us to actually have more of that cross collaboration, and really for us, it should be a way of doing business. Okay, not just for having discussions like this here, but whether it's marketing or sales. There's especially the customer and the diverse customer force that we face. That we support. I feel that we have tremendous opportunities to do more of that. So looking forward to it.
So another question that I've seen during this morning, during the summit, is how do you prevent burnout from being part of ERG leadership? And Mike, I know you were a global lead for 2 years. And Racquel, I know you do a lot of speaking with ERG panels. So how would you, how do you prevent burnout, or have you prevented burnout?
Okay.
That's a good question, Aaron. You're asking at an interesting time in my life, because I think that because it's so natural to want to be part of these things, you do end up, spending more time than probably you originally started to do. But it's so fulfilling that sometimes you forget that it's taking up some of your time and energy. I would say regarding preventing burnout from working with ERGs, I think it's been really easy for me to set, boundaries on time, to be able to say no to things that really don't work, because the ERGs themselves and leadership teams are so supportive of that, right? It's a conversation we have all the time within those ERGs, maybe even more than we do with our regular teams, because of our unique experiences that we actually share, sort of across the group. Still a work in progress, I would say, from that burnout question. But being able to be comfortable enough to speak about it, and then you are getting close to it potentially and sometimes in your life and during your career, it's been really helpful to be part of the ERG itself, because it's such a great place to sort of share that experience.
Yeah, and I would answer that, Aaron, maybe from a structural point of view, because I've had the same discussion with our chief diversity officer. And I know that she basically made the decision last year to implement limits. Okay, so now for our ERG leaders here, we have a 2-year limit. Okay, as far as the ERG roles, and I totally agree with that for a number of reasons here. One, from a talent development perspective, I think that ERGs represent a great opportunity for those who want to do meaningful work here to develop themselves. All right, and so therefore, I think 2 years is a good time frame for someone to really make a difference and impact, but also give others a chance. There's a lot of talent out there, a lot of folks raising their hands, and sometimes, okay, inadvertently, you can kind of develop these informal fiefdoms, if you will, when you kind of are there forever. So I think that 2-year limit actually allows you to set specific goals for yourself, and also allows for that continuous growth, okay, and nurturing of new leadership as well. So that's kind of my take. And personally, how do I do it? You have to be able to say no and just do a few things well. I know that we can do a lot of things, but you can't do everything great. All right. And so I've learned over time, especially as we only have so much spare time, that you have to be willing to say yes to the right things, but also you have to be willing to say no sometimes here. Okay. And if you do take something on, I've given this advice many times, maybe do 1 or 2 things, but max. Don't take on a handful, because you have this thing called a day job, especially when you're doing ERG work. And you don't want that to be a downer. I think that the people who tend to do best in ERGs are people who tend to do very good at their jobs. All right, and they take on additional responsibility in a focused manner. But you don't want to get into the downside of it, where it becomes now a detractor from your day job, because then all of a sudden you turn an important business product as far as ERGs into a negative here from a perception point of view, which you don't want to do that.
So, Mike, is there any kind of like succession planning when it comes to ERG leadership? Is that something that was cultivated when you were global leader for Avon?
Well, 100%. I know that. In fact, Tamika and I, we were the first ones, at least in our ERG, to put the limit. We made the decision for the reasons I've already stated. And so it's an interesting thing. When you have a time limit, you will start doing succession planning, because you say, wait a minute, someone's got to do this work. And I get to use the most recent example. Okay, what's interesting is how fast time flies. So basically in 2020, I turned it over to Ponda Deshego, who again is our leader of RISE. She's also a leader of our Black Employee Network. By the way, she's very famous if you don't know. She's been featured in Savoy magazine and most recently in the LA Times here. So my goal is to actually get an autograph one day. She's definitely the deal. Okay, but that being said, it's amazing that now it's been 2 years since she's had the role. Okay, and so actually we've been in discussion with her, as well as with our chief diversity officer. Okay, as far as identifying the next person who has in fact been identified. But I think that the time limit itself, Aaron, kind of sets you up for it, because if there's a specific time limit, either the ball gets dropped or someone's going to get a real cold handoff. So you want to kind of obviously work towards that end. So structurally, I think we set ourselves up for that.
No, that's a good point, and that's something I didn't even know, because joining Amgen, and you really want to be a part of everything. And I joined a lot of ERGs, and then I started getting emails from them. And obviously I can't make every event at the same time. So I think that's a good perspective for people who are new into the ERG space to understand, because I didn't know that in the beginning, but I'm learning it now.
Hey, Aaron, if I could clarify one thing too, there's joining, okay, as far as being a participant, a member, and there's actually doing. Okay, so every ERG has specific roles. And so it's one thing to be a member. You come when you come, and you're there when you're there is great. But also you take on that mantle of leadership in one of those roles, it becomes a different animal, okay? And there's a level of responsibility that goes with that. And that's what we're talking about, okay, as far as those time limits, if you will. Obviously, you can be a member of the ERG as long as you want to, but as far as the leadership role, it's definitely a burden, okay, a welcome one by those who are passionate, like Racquel and myself here, but it still is a time burden. So you have to keep that in perspective.
No, good, very, very good point. Excellent point. So careers aren't just about work. Fulfilling jobs should also offer employees personal as well as professional development, a support network, and a sense of belonging. That's why ERGs have an important part to play in organizations. ERGs provide networking, professional development, and career advancement opportunities for group members. They foster positive and inclusive environments for all employees and influence policies and procedures that make a more equitable and welcoming work environment. Building a diverse and inclusive workplace doesn't happen overnight, but ERGs can be a powerful step forward to greater inclusion, diversity, and belonging. I would like to thank our amazing panelists for sharing their Amgen journey, experiences, and helping to inform us on the business acumen of the organization. And definitely, I love working at Amgen because the culture there does promote ERGs. And, you know, being one of relatively new employee, seeing it from the beginning, you know, kind of doing my internship or fellowship there and now actually being in a company and seeing it really resonate all the way through is very, very impactful to me as far as retention and wanting to stay with the company. So for the audience online today, because I am participating in the summit all week long, if you have some questions that you may think of later, you can shoot them through me through the chat, or I'll also be at the on-site as well. So any final closing comments from you, Micah or Racquel?
Racquel?
No, I think that we covered some really great questions here, Aaron. I can tell from the chat that at least that we've left some really good points to sort of think about and take action on as people go through. I think what we've highlighted here is how important ERGs are to the organization, but especially individually to your own careers. So really happy to be able to share my experience, and thanks so much for the conversation.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, Aaron, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. Thank you for leading it. I'd like to thank Racquel for being a trusted partner, as always, here, and a very credible one. I always say whenever I'm around Racquel, my IQ goes up about 10 to 20 points. The challenge is when she walks away, it goes back to baseline or below, but that's for another time. That being said, for all of you who are out there, okay, we appreciate your interest here and recognize that, you know, ERGs allow you a chance to kind of be your authentic selves. And if you have a true passion for business here and a desire to make a difference, it's a great platform. You have a great idea that you bring to your leaders here that you can actually make an impact in a very positive way for your company, but also too, you can also help yourself as well as others as far as developing and showcasing talent that you guys have along with that passion. So thanks again for the opportunity, and I'd like to wish you all my best going forward in your ERG ventures. Thank you very much.
All right, Mike and Racquel, thank you again. And with that, Jennifer, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for such a great discussion. You guys are really driving health equity in this space, and the work you're doing is so important for communities and really for the world. So I'm just very grateful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the great work.